What if your body already carries proof that you belong to a different story than the one you were taught? What if, hidden beneath routine sensations and forgotten touch, there are subtle signatures, 3 small physical marks, meant to remind you of an origin beyond compulsion, and that very reminder has been quietly sidelined by systems that preferred you remain dependent on intermediaries? The title of this video names that truth bluntly: the hidden agenda behind the suppression of your third eye. Here is the promise. I will show you a clear, gentle way to check your own body for these signs, explain why ancient accounts say they were suppressed, and guide you through a soft, repeatable affirmation that functions as a recognition. Nothing magical guaranteed, only an invitation to notice what is already present. If you want the full activation series, subscribe now. In 1945, a cache of texts surfaced near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. Among them were writings that did not fit the categories later labeled orthodox by institutional religion. The Gospel of Philip, fragments of ritual texts, and other Gnostic writings present a different vocabulary for what makes a person whole. These sources speak of memory, seals, and marks that point back to an original source often called the monad. Scholars note that these manuscripts reflect communities for whom knowledge, gnosis, was not merely intellectual but embodied. That alone helps explain why, as religious structures consolidated in the centuries that followed, teachings that empowered direct, embodied verification of one's origin could feel threatening. If people could recognize their own connection, the need for centralized authority to mediate access to the divine would weaken. In plain terms, a living, verifiable method of inner recognition changes power dynamics. According to these Gnostic accounts and historical studies, that is precisely why some practices were sidelined, dismissed, or framed as suspect. To understand the logic of suppression, it helps to glimpse the cosmology these texts offer. In that framework, the monad is the primordial source, the ineffable origin from which life and true knowing flow. Between the monad and the human soul stands a structure sometimes described as the demiurge, an architect of the visible world and its laws, not necessarily malevolent in moral terms, but constraining in function. Around that structure operate the archons, patterns, frequencies, or controlling intelligences that cloud perception and instill repetitive thought forms. This language is not mainstream Christian doctrine. It belongs to particular strands of Gnostic thought, and I say that clearly so you can hold it responsibly. Nevertheless, these concepts provide a model to explain why a bodily sign, something simple and verifiable, might be suppressed. If an inner memory can be sparked by touch and attention, then the intermediary's monopoly is interrupted. According to the tradition, the archons respond by creating doubt, noise, and distraction, a slow erosion of trust in bodily knowing. So, what are the signatures these texts and traditions point to? They are described as 3 marks, each in a precise place and each tied to a function of your being: origin, perception, and command. I will explain each in turn, offer a gentle way to check for it, and suggest the meaning the mark carries. As you listen, treat this as an experiment in attention. No force, no promises, just noticing. Mark 1. Origin. Location: the base of the skull, where skull meets spine. In the tradition, the mark is called an origin sign, a subtle texture, a small dimple, line, or change in the surface that many never consider. When you place your fingers there gently, you may discover a tiny indentation, a slight change in temperature, or simply a place that holds attention more readily than the skin around it. Symbolically, this point is said to register the fact of your coming from the monad, an imprint of origin, a physical memory of being from a source that precedes the visible order. Before you check, breathe slowly. Let each inhalation arrive with curiosity. Let each exhalation release expectation. Tilt your head forward just enough to relax the neck. Using the pads of your fingers, very lightly place them at the nape, where the skull rounds into the spine. Do not press hard. Feel for texture, a subtle hollow, or a soft resistance. Stay with the sensation for a few breaths. Notice any warmth, any echoing sensation that might not be in the skin but deeper, an inner attention that the body seems to welcome. If nothing distinct appears, do not conclude absence or failure. Sometimes the simple act of searching shifts something. Sometimes it takes repeated, gentle attention over days to register. Observe whatever arises. Let doubt appear. It is an expected companion here. Mark 2. Perception. Location. The lateral edge of your hand, roughly between the base of the pinky and the wrist. The description given in several Gnostic reports compares it to a line, a raised area, or a subtle seam. This mark is tied to perception, how you receive impressions from the world, how sight and inner seeing align. It is often associated with the third eye vocabulary in popular spiritual language, but the tradition I reference keeps the sign grounded, an accessible, touchable marker that anchors inner perception. Again, breathe. Bring your attention to the right hand first, then the left, whichever feels more comfortable. With your opposite hand, trace the space along the pinky side, feeling for a thin ridge, a slight thickness, or a texture different from the surrounding skin. Slide your finger gently along that edge. If you can, hold the spot and allow your breath to sink into the area. Notice if your attention shifts. Does your mind quiet? Does a faint sense of clarity arrive? Do images or memories flicker, or do you feel resistance? Resist the urge to narrate or explain immediately. The inner critic or the skeptic, what this tradition would call an archonic ripple, often tries to rename these sensations as imagination. Name the thought, then return your attention to the hand's contact. The body is your witness. Allow it to speak in simple data. Mark 3. Command. Location. The center of the sternum, the hollow at the throat of the chest, commonly called the breastbone or sternum center. This point is described as a seat of decision, a place where internal authority can be felt. When touched gently, some report an expanding warmth, a settling pulse, or a quieting that radiates from the sternum outward. Symbolically, it is the command center, not as dominance over others, but as the point where choice aligns with remembrance. Place both hands over the center of your chest, palms resting lightly. Breathe into your hands. Do not press. Let your palms be an ally, not an interrogator. As you breathe, feel for a soft pulse, a spreading warmth, a sense of calm that is not merely emotional, but more like a resetting of amplitude in your field. If a subtle change occurs, simply observe. If nothing is apparent, that too is a valid report. The exercise is about the fidelity of attention, not about forcing proof. Over time, repeated gentle checks establish a pattern of recognition that becomes less dependent on spectacle and more on steady memory. As you practice these checks, expect interference. The tradition names the predictable internal noise as archonic counterthoughts, automatic reactions designed to divert you from embodied data. They show up as lightning-fast judgments. It's imagination. You're making this up. You're just wanting it to be true. When those voices arise, don't argue. Argument is the currency the noise prefers. Instead, label the thought briefly, noise, and return to sensation. The body does not argue back. It reports. Your role is not to defeat the thought, but to witness it while choosing attention for the body's input. This stance, observe, don't engage, is the primary technical skill of this work. There's a practical reason to expect resistance. If a method makes people less dependent on external authority, structures invested in mediation may have historically discouraged it. That discouragement takes many forms: questioning the method's legitimacy, labeling it as mere fancy, or reframing embodied knowing as undisciplined. Those responses are structural, not always malicious. Many institutions grew to preserve communal coherence. Still, the consequence for individuals can be real: shame, confusion, silence. If you find yourself shrinking, Know that is part of an expected pattern. Remember, recognition often separates you from consensus before it reunites you with those who share the same memory. When the marks are acknowledged privately, a subtle shift tends to happen. It is not fireworks. Often, it is a steadying. Decisions feel less borrowed. Inner impressions hold a new authority. You find yourself trusting the small compass of bodily knowing in situations you would have once outsourced. Socially, this can feel isolating. Friends, family, or community may not understand, and that loneliness can be part of the initiation. But remember that the tradition also speaks of reunion, a gathering of fragments who recognize one another, and through simple signals, build new kinds of companionship that do not require external authorization for truth. Before we move into a brief activation, a few cautions and clarifications that are essential. First, the sources I reference come from Gnostic texts and related accounts. They are not the same as canonical Christian scripture, and they sit outside mainstream theological consensus. I say that deliberately so you can hold what follows with discernment. Second, this process is about recognition, not diagnosis. These marks are not medical indicators, and nothing here should be understood as medical advice. If you have a health concern about any part of your body, consult a professional. Third, no ritual or affirmation guarantees supernatural results. The activation I will offer is an invitation to claim inner authority and to train attention. It is not a promise of miracles. Fourth, practice gently. Never press, cut, pierce, or injure your body in search of signs. The work is subtle and kind. Now I'll guide a brief integrated sequence. You can do this seated or standing, eyes open or closed, whatever helps you remain attentive and safe. Remember, gentle touch, soft attention, and a posture of curiosity. Begin by grounding. Take 3 slow breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth or the nose, whatever is customary for you. With each exhale, allow your shoulders to soften. As you breathe, imagine your attention as a soft light descending into the body, settling where curiosity is kind. Return to Mark 1. Very gently, bring your fingers to the base of the skull. The touch is exploratory, like someone checking the ripeness of a fruit. No force. Notice texture, temperature, or a subtle indentation. Breathe with the sensation. If thoughts arise, judgments, disbelief, note them and let them pass, as if clouds crossing a calm sky. Stay with the contact long enough for the body to register being attended to. When you feel ready, move your fingers away slowly. Shift to Mark 2. Bring your attention to the lateral edge of one hand, the side between the pinky and the wrist. With the opposite hand, slide your finger along that edge, looking for a slight seam, ridge, or denser tissue. Hold it lightly. Breathe into the hand. Watch for a small increase in clarity or an inner image. If nothing obvious happens, simply register that. Curiosity trumps expectation. Move to Mark 3. Rest your palms lightly over the center of your chest. Feel the rise and fall of breath under your hands. Allow the weight of your hands to be a support, not a pressure. As you breathe, see whether a soft warmth or a settling pulse spreads from the sternum outward. Let it be subtle. Do not command it, receive it. If any inner voice insists that this is imagination, remember the technique, label the thought, and return to sensation. When you have completed the 3 touches, sit quietly for a few breaths. Notice differences, even small ones. A steadier breath, a tidier mind, or simply a sense of having reported honestly to yourself. These are the data the practice cultivates. Over time, repetition stabilizes the memory. Now, as an honoring of recognition, not as a magical formula, but as a statement of reclaiming inner authority, speak this 9-word declaration aloud, slowly, with attention. The words are crafted to be precise and reclaiming. Say them once, then again, letting the meaning sink into the body. I remember my origin. I reclaim my inner sight. Feel the cadence. Notice any shift in posture, breath, or inner tone. This declaration is not a prayer to any institution. It is a personal claim, a naming of what you are choosing to recognize. If saying it aloud feels too exposed in your surroundings, you may whisper it or hold it silently. The power here is in repetition and the alignment of word, breath, and touch. Expect something after you speak. Sometimes nothing dramatic. Sometimes a faint reorganization of perception. Sometimes immediate resistance in the form of a racing thought or doubt. When that resistance arrives, treat it as benign background noise. Acknowledge it, then return to your breath and to the felt data of the marks. Over time, the ratio of clear attention to noise will shift in your favor, and that shift is the practical measure of progress in this lineage. What happens next, socially and spiritually, varies. For some, private recognition remains private and quietly alters choices and relationships. For others, recognition pushes toward community. People begin to notice similar signs in others, exchange simple signals, and discover that the memory is shared. The ancient texts describe gatherings where recognition is confirmed not by argument, but by presence, and by the mutual corroboration of simple marks and shared practices. This is not a roadmap to secrecy or cultism. It is a description of how embodied knowing can create new forms of mutual support when older structures feel inadequate. Let me be clear about a danger. The interpretation of what you feel is tempting to inflate. Some will seek authority in their sensations and claim universal mandates on that basis. That is a different path, one of certainty divorced from humility. The practice I offer is a gentle reclaiming of personal authority and discernment. It invites integration, research, relational responsibility, and sometimes restraint. If your recognition moves you toward teaching or leadership, do so with careful ethics. Institutional power without accountability is the same dynamic that led to the suppression we described in the first place. A practical question you may have: what if I don't feel anything? The honest answer is, many do not feel noticeable changes the first time, and that is normal. The process trains perception. Some people require repeated, gentle practice across days or weeks. Others notice immediately. Either way, absence of sensation on day one is not a verdict. Curiosity and consistency are the tools. Likewise, do not compare your inner timeline to anyone else's. This work is deeply personal. Another practical note: these marks, when acknowledged, can reorient how you make decisions. You may find that minor choices, what to say, where to put your energy, become clearer. That clearer compass is not a supernatural guarantee that everything will turn out as you wish. It is a recalibration of what you listen to inside. Use it with humility. Use it with accountability. A word about scholarship and responsible framing. The narrative I've presented draws on a lineage of texts found and studied by scholars, Nag Hammadi materials, fragments attributed to the Gospel of Philip, and interpretive traditions around them. Scholars debate provenance, dating, authorship, and meaning. Many theologians and historians emphasize that these writings represent a diverse set of communities and that their claims sit outside what later became mainstream orthodoxy. I offer them as a coherent model that has explanatory power for the phenomenon of suppression, not as uncontested fact. Hold this material as both evocative and provisional. Finally, if you felt anything at all, an impression, a slight warmth, a settling, then you are encountering data worth honoring. If you felt nothing but were moved by the invitation to practice and to attend to your body differently, that too is meaningful. Whether this becomes a private practice or the beginning of shared exploration, treat it with care. No one should be coerced into experiences, and no one should insist that a single method explains every spiritual reality. Type recognition in the comments if you felt anything during this exercise. Subscribe to follow the next activation, where we will explore how to hold community practices for gentle verification and how to distinguish helpful signals from noise. Remember, these teachings draw from Gnostic sources and sit outside mainstream Christian doctrine. They are a particular way of mapping an inner landscape, not a universal replacement for any tradition. Recognition is an invitation to personal responsibility. What you notice belongs to you, and how you integrate it shapes your path. Go gently with what you find. The marks, when acknowledged, make certain choices irreversible in the sense that you will no longer outsource all authority over your interior life. That can be unsettling and ultimately liberating. Keep curiosity as your companion, humility as your measure, and community as your safeguard.